scroll through and see, but if folks could be sure to be on mute, that would make this a much more enjoyable experience for everyone under the circumstances. Thank you, Martin. I'm really happy to provide some opening remarks for this session on the Ethiopia RFA. I think we all recognize that this is a difficult time for folks, being either disconnected from your workplace or from your colleagues, or working from home, or the COVID-19 crisis has made it hard on all of us personally. But then also, we recognize that there may be challenges with applications, with questions and feedback to partners on what's happening and issues they may have. So we're very open to feedback on how to do that better. But I did want to welcome everyone and really thank everyone for their interest in this RFA process. I think being at home with my children for the past couple of weeks, past couple of months, really they use the term big deal, like that's not a big deal, Dad, or stop making such a big deal out of things. It's a term that gets overused, especially when you have small children. But I think in the context of this RFA, what you all are embarking upon here and participating in really does qualify as a big deal. The work that the team has done over the past years to get to this point, the partners and the stakeholders and all the people who've been a part of this, for USAID and for Food for Peace, this is really one of those big deals. So with that in mind, I just want to thank the Food for Peace team and everyone who's participating in this, and really reflect the pride that we all have in the work that they've done. This RFA will identify partners that will support the next phase of the development food security activity that Food for Peace will fund in support of the government Ethiopia's Productive Safety Net program. The design for this solicitation was a USAID-wide effort, including the Office of Food for Peace, as well as the Bureau for Resilience and Food Security, and also back when it was the Bureau of Food Security as well, USAID's Africa Bureau, many other stakeholders who are all strong supporters of the Productive Safety Net program. During the RFA design process, Food for Peace also consulted with quite a few organizations, NGOs involved with the current iteration of the PSNP in Ethiopia. And the design is really built upon lessons learned, best practices from past experiences, and it incorporates the future aspirations of the government of Ethiopia and civil society. We do expect that the new DFSAs will support the new vision of PSNP 5, but also will be responsive to the needs of vulnerable populations in Ethiopia and will be able to adapt to the challenges and contingencies that may arise in Ethiopia. We really do appreciate the field experience and expertise among applicants. The field expertise among applicants, and we welcome their creative and innovative ideas. This is a great opportunity to have a great discussion under the circumstances, and we thank you for your patience with this format. Finally, I'd just like to thank everyone again for their interest. We have a great team on the line from Food for Peace, both here and in Addis, who are going to help facilitate this. So I'll hand it over to Saba Moritz, who will go over the ground rules and guidance for how to submit official questions to the email address where we're taking feedback. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Taylor. If I could have the next slide, please, that would be great. Greetings to you all. My name is Saba Moritz, and I'm with the Office of Food for Peace in Washington. Again, we welcome you to the solicitation briefing, and we are very happy to have the opportunity to host this virtual gathering, despite all the challenges that COVID-19 is placing in our daily lives. Thank you for joining us. As you see in today's agenda, we'll have an overview of different sections of the draft RFA presented by my colleagues at Food for Peace, followed by a Q&A period. Next slide. However, before we begin, we really would like to quickly go over some ground rules. We have tried to mute everyone during the presentation, and we're asking that you remain muted throughout the entire time. Also, if you haven't done so, kindly turn off your cameras. Sometimes that helps with the Wi-Fi connection. You are welcome to type your questions using the chat box from the WebEx during the entire briefing at any time. And we'll try to answer as many of your questions as we can at the end of the presentation. We'll attempt to get to them all, but if we don't, please submit them to the email that was provided in the RFA. Next slide. As you have by now seen in the draft RFA, USAID is planning to award up to 4 cooperative agreements, and of course, as always, this is subject to the availability of funds. We are anticipating to have funding of up to $550 million for the combined 4 awards of Title II funds, of which up to $300 million may be used to budget for Section 202E, which also may be used for cash transfers or vouchers. This RFA is asking all applicants to focus on 3 regions of Tigray, Amhara, and Oromia in Ethiopia. Please note that the Dire Dawa and Harari regions are not part of this solicitation as they were before. In addition, applicants should really focus on the government's PSNP Program Implementation Manual, or PIM, building on developing livelihood interventions. Upon award, USAID will use the refine and implement model during the first year of the award, where in close collaboration with Food for Peace staff, the awardee will refine their theory of change, community priorities, and their needs assessment. Please note that these awards will only use Title II funds, and other sources of funding such as CDF and monetization are not authorized at this time. Again, we welcome your comments and more detailed questions on the RFA specifically by the deadline of May 15th to be submitted via the email provided in the RFA. We have also asked all of our partners to write to us about some of the challenges that you are facing during the pandemic and how these challenges may affect your application process. Now I would like to ask my colleague Ndale to go over the background and overview of the RFA. To you, Ndale.
Okay, thank you, Saba. Hello, everyone. My name is Ndale. I'm from Ethiopia mission, working for the Food for Peace programs in the country. Can you move to the next slide, Laura? Sorry. So I will take you to the next 4 slides, focusing on the mission, strategy, the background in the context of the country, and the current status of the PSNP5 design, which is under process. The first part is about the mission's result framework with the new strategy, that we call CDCS 2.0. So this strategy has been approved last year in July 2019. It will run for the next 5 years. There are 4 basic development objectives set under the strategy and 1 special objective. So the goal of the strategy is, as you can see from the slide, Ethiopia transitions to a more democratic, prosperous, and resilient society with accountable institutions and private sector-led growth. So with this activity, DFSA 2, it's expected to align with the two DOs of the strategy, the first two DOs, DO1 and DO2, the disaster risk management strengthened and resilience of vulnerable populations to key shocks increased. Its primary house will be DO2 in particular, because activity is expected to contribute to the intermediate results of this DO2. There are shocks which are already identified under the strategy's development objective 2, even though there are lots of shocks that we experience in Ethiopia, which are humanly induced and natural occurring shocks, we identified and decided 3 basic key shocks that this development objective is set to contribute. The first one is the weather-related shock, that's basically drought and disease outbreak and conflict. So accordingly, the intermediate results of this development objective are set in such a way that it addresses the key shocks which are identified by the strategy. Next slide, please. So, as you all know, PSNP has been operating in Ethiopia since 2005. So it's almost more than 15 years since we have been supporting, complementing this giant program in the country. So lots of results have been seen due to the PSNP interventions, basically on the health, nutrition, education, and other key human development indicators, with particular focus on chronic and acute food insecurities, on chronic malnutrition. We have seen lots of improvements and change since PSNP has been in place so far in the last 15 years. For example, stunting in 2005, it was 51% when the program started. According to the mini DHS that conducted in 2019, stunting level is now 37% for children under 5. Wasting is also the same. It decreases from 12% to 7% from 2005, which we can see the result in mini DHS in 2019. Underweight is also decreasing accordingly. However, we are still a lot to go to address these great challenges, particularly the stunting and wasting, which PSNP is also expected to contribute a lot. And again, U.S. government has been supporting Ethiopian Development Humanitarian Assistance Program in many ways. We have been complementing, supporting PSNP through our previous programs, the first one, DAP, then MIAP, and again, DFAP. Then currently we are managing the first phase of DFSA. So we continue to support PSNP in the next 5 years as we are already designing it. On the humanitarian assistance side, USAID is the largest bilateral donor agency in Ethiopia that supports the humanitarian assistance in the country in many ways. There are activities listed here: our GEO program, our flagship emergency project, the PRRO, emergency relief in Somali region, and the relief support to refugees program. And again, other programs also currently under design, which are now the mission and FUFOP is currently working on it. APS, as you all know, is already out. The job APS and the CLA platform are also under design. Even though we are still working in all aspects of development and humanitarian assistance in the country, there are challenges still appearing in the country. The weather-based shock, inflation, conflict, these all challenges are continuing to happen in the country. And again, there are distinct challenges even currently that all partners and USAID as well facing is the COVID-19 situation. And again, the desert's local situation. I don't want to just go detail into these all things, but it's still a challenge and continues to be our bottleneck in the next several months. Next slide, please. Okay, with regard to PSNP 5, as I mentioned earlier, the government of Ethiopia launched the design of PSNP 5 in August 2019. Continued from that time, the design process is going on. At this time, we have got the draft logical framework, the theory of change, and draft design document of this program. There are core components which are already identified under PSNP 5, which have also been happening in the current program PSNP. I mean, the timely and the predictable food and cash transfer, the public work and livelihood interventions. These three components of PSNP are continue to be the major part of the next phase of the program. There are uncertainties still that are not resolved by government as well as donors. For example, in terms of institutional arrangements, there is still a discussion going on the government side and donors to clearly decide which government stakeholder will take which part of PSNP in terms of leading. And again, on the public works side, there are proposed ideas into the design document that need further discussion decision by government. For example, the increase of height of dams from 10 meters to 15 meters, and working on private lands, I mean, with the public work activities, that could be an opportunity to create linkage between public work asset creation with the objective of livelihood and nutrition improvements. And also one thing to mention in terms of livelihood transfer, in the new design document, there is an idea to support ultra-poor clients with the livelihood transfer who have the aspiration and the potential to graduate from the program. So these and other things which are still under discussion and need a decision from the government side. Other components besides to the core components of PSNP like child education, child youth focus, and the community health insurances are considered as leverage points and synergies of efforts for the program, and which are also managed by parallel programs from the other side. And again, when PSNP 5 will come on board, implementations of the different components of the program will be in a phased approach. For example, in terms of geographic targeting, targeting and retargeting of PSNP claims, the livelihoods implementations in lowland parts of the country will also be implemented in a phased approach. So the program design is still under process. We assume that when the RFA of this activity will be released, still the design process may not be completed or approved. So these are uncertainties that we also foresee in the next few months. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. This is my last slide. PSNP 5 goal is to reduce extreme poverty in rural Ethiopia. So reduction of poverty is the center of the objective of the program, not reducing food insecurity. So our indicators at the goal level are designed in such a way that to measure the reduction in poverty. At the outcome level, we see resilience at the top. So the objective is to enhance resilience of extremely poor and vulnerable female and male members of rural households in PSNP Woredas. There are six outputs designed and identified so far. So 3 of them are from the core components of PSNP. The first one is regular transfer of resources, both cash and food. In this case, it's expected from these outputs that there will be a timeliness, predictability, appropriateness, and adequacy of transfers, which will remain central to this result. Another thing on the cash part is there is a plan to modernize the infrastructure and the process for PSNP along the way to digitize, and basically in all cash workers, the transfer will be electronically according to the plan. The second one is a shock responsive transfer. This is all about the continuous of response or scalable safety net that links PSNP to the humanitarian response system in order to respond to shocks more effectively. A shock responsive safety net requires functioning, consolidated institutional arrangement for its effective implementation. So other systems which are expected to be coming on board along with the shock responsive safety net will be strengthening the early warning system and the single delivery system. So bringing the emergency response and development together is the ultimate goal of this output. On the third part, it's all about public works, but as public work has been contributing to improving the natural resource management and climate change adaptation, it will also be expected to link the livelihoods at the household level. So the focus of this output is enhancing livelihoods and enabling climate change adaptations. So livelihoods and public work will need work in harmony to ensure that public work will build the livelihoods of PSNP plans. So there will be a trickle-down effect of the public works towards the household level impacts, particularly building the resilience of households. This has been part of actually the PSNP4 design, but it was not properly done or implemented. So it will be the major focus in the next iteration. The fourth one is linkage to available social services. In this regard, the PSNP5 will target householders who are vulnerable, particularly the pregnant and lactating women, disabled people, age-old PDS clients, to link them to different forms of social services, be it a kind of health insurance, nutrition services, and the different forms of legal services. The fifth output is also a core component, a tailored livelihoods options, which meets PSNP performance standard accessed by eligible PSNP claims. So in this case, the tailored approach is to emphasize the need for livelihood beneficiary claims profiling to determine livelihood options suitable for each group, focusing on a reasonably smaller number of beneficiaries for increased results instead of spreading limited resources across a large number of beneficiaries in key for success. So profiling will be the first phase of actually implementation of the livelihood interventions, identifying beneficiaries based on their need, based on the context of the area, then to directly target them to the appropriate type of livelihoods to which they are interested or have chosen. The last one is the PSNP management and capacity enhanced. This is a regulatory part of PSNP that focuses on managing the commodity resources, physical resources, financial resources, as well as monitoring, evaluation, and learning is also part of this output. And again, strengthening the capacity of government staffs and all other PSNP actors from top to bottom. And finally, to strengthen the coordination efforts among different entities. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much. I will leave the next slide to Martin. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Ndali. I'm Martin Hayes. I'm a country backstop officer for the Ethiopia DFSA portfolio based in Washington. This is the RFA's conceptual framework that should guide the development of your application. It provides details down to the interim results level. The goal is improved food security of vulnerable households in targeted PSMP communities, contributing to a sustained reduction in rural poverty. This goal is aligned with the PSMP5's goal that Ndali just described by addressing poverty reduction. And we believe that this alignment is very important. It's also consistent with Food for Peace's mandate of addressing food security. The conceptual framework has 3 interrelated strategic objectives. The first strategic objective includes increasing the quantity, quality, and diversity of food through consumption smoothing, improving access to nutritious food, and addressing feeding practices of infants and young children. The second strategic objective involves strengthening livelihoods through improving household assets, capacity building, and livelihood diversification, including off-farm livelihoods and employment opportunities. The third and final strategic objective is about system strengthening aimed at improving the accountability, effectiveness, and shock responsiveness of the PSMP. This should be done through improving planning, construction, and management of community assets, improving access to essential services and strengthening infrastructure, improving PSMP service delivery, and improving early warning, preparedness, and shock responsiveness capacities. Next slide, please. Here are our 8 programming principles that we recommend that you consider when developing your applications. The first involves the use of a people-centered approach. This should include putting the most vulnerable people in targeted communities at the center of your work, with the aim of promoting self-reliance, social and economic empowerment of women, men, and young people. The second principle is to be prioritized, focused, and context specific. We realize that there are many challenges facing our targeted population. However, we need to prioritize the resources in a very focused and context-specific manner to improve the chances of making meaningful and positive changes for impoverished households. Your actions should be feasible, catalytic in nature, and tailored to the needs of each target subpopulation. The third principle involves strengthening systems to improve sustainability. As applicants, you should demonstrate your unique ability to engage directly with communities and with the operational levels of government. These relationships and lessons learned from them will be important in helping to inform the overall PSMP system and to develop the local capacities required for sustainability in the long term. Next, leverage and link to strengthen collective impact. Where possible, you should seek to layer, sequence, and integrate activities to create opportunities for positive change. Coordination with the government of Ethiopia is critical to the success of the DFSA, and you should be able to demonstrate that you have understanding that you understand the special considerations for working with local and federal government in the Ethiopian context. As the government of Ethiopia moves towards a continuum of response between emergency and development initiatives, coordination with Food for Peace's Joint Emergency Operations Program, or JEOP, and its corresponding government of Ethiopia implementing mechanisms will be critical. The next principle involves the anticipation and management of shocks and stressors. You should be able to anticipate spikes in humanitarian needs and in intervention areas over the life of the award, and have strategies and contingency plans in place to adaptively manage activities in a response to shocks. Specifically, you will have to work closely with JEOP partners to provide a continuum of response. The next two principles include support for the enfranchisement, aspirations, and agency of women and youths. In designing activities, you should use gender and youth-sensitive approaches to understanding the unique challenges facing these two overlapping segments of the population in order to ensure that women and youth have equitable chances of benefiting from economic opportunities. This should involve both capacity building as well as contributing to fostering, enabling local environments. Finally, adaptive management. Implementing partners will need to adapt through collaboration and learning with other USAID partners, local actors, and of course, the government of Ethiopia. So these are our 8 programming principles. So now I'd like to hand it over to Randy, who will talk about the livelihoods design elements. Over to you, Randy.
Thanks, Martin, and greetings, everyone. My name is Randy Smith. I'm the Food Security, Social Protection, and Resilience Team Leader with USAID Ethiopia. I'm part of the Food for Peace team based in Ethiopia Mission. Applicants should primarily operate in WREDAs where in-kind food assistance is more appropriate than providing cash transfers. This means that applicants should reserve Food for Peace cash resources for livelihood interventions. This strategic layering is meant to focus Title II commodity resources towards consumption smoothing and cash resources towards livelihood support services that foster household graduation out of the PSMP. Second, the DFSAs will support the creation of sustainable pathways out of poverty through an enhanced or deepened livelihood programming approach that focuses on 3 main components for households. Component 1, increasing productive household assets. Component 2, enhancing household capabilities such as life skills, financial literacy, job-relevant skills, and positive coping strategies. And component 3, supporting income diversification opportunities that provide higher household incomes that are also more resilient to climate-related shocks. When this livelihood deepening approach is complemented with consumption smoothing, it represents a push factor in supporting household graduation out of poverty. The pull factor is a livelihood approach where partners link PSMP households with viable farming, off-farm, or formal employment opportunities that foster graduation from the PSMP and into working within their local market system. This push-pull approach may mean that DFSAs try livelihood interventions that are beyond what is outlined in the PSMP Program Implementation Manual, or PIM, and that is totally okay. This broader toolkit of approaches is meant to give DFSAs the flexibility to pilot new, innovative livelihood approaches that have shown promise in other safety net or poverty alleviation programs, and to scale them within the DFSAs. USAID also encourages applicants to consider piloting livelihood approaches that can be adopted by the government of Ethiopia and scaled through the entire PSMP5 program. DFSA applicants are expected to target at least 1/3 of the overall PSMP households, and they're selected rated for livelihood and income generating interventions. Applicants should use the Household Economic Approach, or HEA, for targeting purposes, as was outlined in the RFA. Applicants should also discuss different targeting strategies for women, men, and youth, with a clear explanation of how they intend to deliberately engage these gender and age groups across all livelihood interventions. The point is this: DFSA applicants should be strategic and focused in targeting their livelihoods programming to maximize Food for Peace cash resources. Next slide, please. Applicants should focus on enhancing the capabilities of PSMP beneficiaries to support these households in their journeys to self-reliance. This means focusing on building financial literacy, life skills, and job relevant skills of clients so they can pull themselves out of poverty. Applicants should focus on increasing household savings and ownership of productive assets so that they can leverage these assets towards more sustainable on-farm, off-farm, and employment livelihood opportunities within their local market systems. DFSA applicants should view livelihood interventions as a mutually reinforcing process that leads to household graduation out of the safety net program and into productive work within local market systems. DFSA applicants should use a making markets work for the poor, or M4P approach, when considering their livelihood interventions. The M4P approach recognizes that vulnerable households are both affected by and are key actors within rural market systems, and that their livelihood prospects are linked to the markets that surround them. There are systemic barriers that limit a poor household's ability to effectively engage with the markets around them. These barriers need to be addressed in addition to livelihood training and support provided to DFSA clients in order to foster market systems development. USAID encourages applicants to consider DFSAs as a catalytic force in rural market system development for poor households, and to partner with both USAID and non-USAID activities in addressing other supporting functions, rules, and core functions of the market system. Applicants are encouraged to consider additional approaches that will help PSMP participants improve the management and value addition of their productive assets. USAID's involvement in community engagement in the selection of public works among its DFSAs has been relatively limited to date. Applicants are encouraged to propose new approaches for engaging with WREDA officials to better align and prioritize community asset building activities with individual households' asset creation efforts. Food for work activities that substantially increase poor people's time burden without producing any clear and direct benefit for the participant other than the transfer itself should not be proposed. And with that, I'll hand it over to Cliff. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Randy. Hello, everyone. This is Cliff Davison with the Office of Food for Peace in Washington. Could we go to the next slide, please? Opportunities to layer is not only a design element, but it is also an overall USAID Food for Peace programming principle. We have signaled in this RFA under the high-level conceptual framework, as both under the goal description paragraphs, as well as under Strategic Objective 3, Intermediate Result 3.2, referral and linkages to essential services and institutions improved. This element is also described in the programming principle in the RFA of leverage and link to strengthen collective impact. From the USAID Food for Peace Ethiopia team's perspective, layering involves geographic and programmatic overlap and collaboration of its activities. As can be seen on this map, Food for Peace development activities are not a standalone activity and are expected to partner with, support, and leverage a significant portfolio of complementary activities. This includes the USAID-funded Feed the Future activities, which the DFSAs are a part of, and are depicted here in the map under that yellow Livelihoods for Resilience layout. Overall, it's important to ensure that the DFSAs are integrated within the wider PSMP effort as well. In WREDAs where other complementary USAID-funded activities are being implemented, it's strongly recommended that applicants actively plan activities together with other implementing partners to basically increase the synergies and achieve the greatest impact of overall activity effect. We've asked applicants in the RFA to provide a map that illustrates proposed intervention areas and activity layering down to the woreda, known as district level. USAID will have the final approval of the geographic focus in order to maximize opportunities for strategic layering of related implementation mechanisms. In addition, it's expected that applicants plan to meet regularly with donors, partners working at regional and national levels to share information and strategically coordinate efforts to strengthen the collective impact. USAID may support awardees eventually in these efforts to strengthen the collective impact by establishing a collaboration learning and adaptation platform, which will manage and synthesize learning across follow-on development food security activities and other relevant Highland USAID investments. With USAID support through pre- and post-award creation opportunities, applicants will be encouraged to develop joint work plans with other USAID partners, implementing emergency food security activities, livelihood activities, nutrition, health, access to finance, and WASH activities. Recipients should anticipate and budget for significant collaboration, including appropriate staffing for joint work planning and monitoring. The recipient is expected to reflect the integration and collaboration among its technical sectors and to propose staffing structures that encourage synergy, collaboration, and learning across the entire project. Next slide, please. In particular, we want to highlight and clarify two opportunities to layer. As the government of Ethiopia moves towards a continuum of response between emergency and development initiatives, coordination with the Food for Peace Joint Emergency Operation, or JOP, and its corresponding Government of Ethiopia emergency implementing mechanisms will be critical. We ask that applicants relate to large-scale emergency programming and propose ways to work towards a scalable safety net that better links the productive safety net program inputs to humanitarian response for improved efficiency and effectiveness. In terms of opportunities for livelihood layering, Food for Peace has identified the existing activities of Livelihood for Resilience, or L4R, and Livelihoods for Oromia, LRO, as key USAID investments that applicants must layer with both geographically and technically. So what does that mean? There are basically three approaches applicants will need to consider in regards to those two activities. In areas where there is only a development food security activity, the DFSA should implement core PSMP components, that is, consumption transfers, the public work components, plus a full complement set of deepened livelihood interventions that would most likely foster and lead to graduation. However, in weredas where there exists livelihood for resilience or livelihood for Oromia activities are present, the DFSA would implement only the core PSMP components, and rather livelihoods for resilience or livelihoods for Oromia, these other activities will continue the deepened livelihood programming. The other consideration is that in weredas that the DFSA proposes, where deepening livelihood programming is not yet viable nor appropriate, the DFSA should constrain its activities and focus on implementation of only core PSMP components. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague Kanjit.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kanjit, and I'm with USAID Ethiopia, working as a social protection advisor. Now I'm going to present this slide. On the next slide, please. On innovation and how this is important in our work. And PSMP is an implementation for the last 15 years. And the DFSAs are also supporting the PSMP and has been implemented. The DFSA or the DFAPs or the MIAPs have been in implementation for equal amount of time. While the intervention brought substantial results in consumption smoothing, natural resource management, soil and water conservation, reforestation, social infrastructure, and other things, results that we results that we see are really hard to get translated or in transforming the lives and livelihoods of the individual PSNP clients as desired. So, like problems in timely and accountable transfers, meeting the required performance standard in transfers, in targeting, public works design, planning, and execution, innovativeness to guide public work participants, to apply indigenous innovations, land management, water harvesting development, or harmonizing emergency and development client registries and targeting. All these are critical components, but the progress towards like bringing a significant change are limited. In addition, identifying barriers and building alternative livelihoods that are supported by appropriate and affordable technology and markets are limited. So in general, applicants, it's important for applicants to consider supporting the development of new scalable approaches to the key focus components and areas where development gains can progress as expected, and the support to the government of Ethiopia's PSNP's efforts to modernize the program is critical. Hence, and it's important that we are encouraging applicants to propose new and tailored innovative approaches that can be tested and then proven cost-effective and sustainable results can be scaled up to transform the lives of PSNP clients, women, men, and youth in PSNP. This means that it's a graduation or exit from the PSNP permanently, and also improving the implementation in general, the intervention in poverty reduction. So innovation is a very important component for the PSNP or the DFSA implementation. Next slide, please. I'm going to mention about the emphasis on youth in the coming application, because youth are a critical part of the Ethiopian population, but who lacks interventions that are critical in terms of, because they don't have access to land credit and access to finance or agricultural inputs or education and in general viable resources for livelihood development. Especially challenge of youth among extremely poor PSNP households is significant, which is exacerbated by the poverty situation in the PSNP households. In the PSNP4, the employment pathway was regarded as one of the innovative elements of the PSNP in the livelihood component, which aims to link the unemployed youth of the PSNP households with potential employers. However, this implementation is not progressed as expected due to many challenges, including absence of public and private institutions and lack of capacity to implement and so on. So in this coming phase, it is youth engagement and youth involvement in productively is still very critical, and critical in also pursuing positive youth development strategies in our approach. that we need to take into account differences and disparities and constraints faced by different youth cohorts, and designing appropriate and tailored activities for the different groups. Addressing unique challenge of youth in the PSNP households require innovative approaches, just to reiterate, and specific programming that goes beyond the PM. So innovativeness is required in addressing the PSNP and the PSNP youth. Vulnerable youths from PSNP households, including landless youths, should be included in the activity design, and applicants are encouraged to identify alternative pathways and livelihoods, and also targeting strategies when we target households in PSNP. So with that, just to emphasize that the target group is going to be youth in PSNP households, and having a tailored approach for PSNP youths are critical in the design. Thank you.
Next slide, please.
I'll pass it to Melanie on nutrition.
Hi, this is Melanie Thurber with USAID Ethiopia. The PSNP in Ethiopia is considered nutrition sensitive, meaning we anticipate improving nutrition outcomes through its implementation. As we saw in the conceptual framework, USAID anticipates a focus on dietary diversity and IYCF practices. We encourage future DFSAs to go beyond the PIM and look at shifting social norms around dietary diversity and feeding practices. To do this, nutrition should be mainstreamed across sectors to ensure that to the extent possible, PSNP interventions can contribute to improving nutrition. When we think about nutrition sensitive, we also include WASH and want to ensure that we are strategic in terms of how the future DFSAs will contribute and support the National One WASH campaign. Next slide, please. Cliff spoke earlier about layering other USAID investments. In Ethiopia, there are several national programs that can also improve PSNP clients' access to basic services. Some of these programs are listed here, but this is not an exhaustive list. Future DFSAs should consider linkages to these programs and its complementarities. DFSAs should also be community-driven and strengthen citizen engagement and governance. Not only will DFSAs support national public services, but can also consider private sector opportunities for inclusive market systems for vulnerable households. This can include building partnerships with new financial service providers and using new telecom services for rural populations. Next slide, and I'll pass it back to Cliff.
Thank you, Melanie. So this slide is covering the multi-stage process. So please be aware that the RFA follows a multi-stage review process and includes pre-award and post-award co-creation opportunities, as well as a handover process. Once the RFA is finalized, we expect to add a timeline annex to the RFA to clarify estimated overlap timelines. It is not feasible right now, as we are still collecting impacts on what coronavirus may do to the application process, and we were still under a draft RFA review period. But in an effort to help clarify those timelines now, we would like to review the multi-stage process. Overall, there are 7 different phases we would like to cover today. 5 of the phases are part of what is probably more a traditional procurement process. The competitive procurement will have 2 merit review phases. One will occur with the initial application, and the other will occur with the oral presentation. These merit review phases will identify which applicants will be invited to a limited in scope pre-award co-creation workshop Phase 1 instructions are detailed in the RFA, but we did want to highlight two particular differences compared to other previous Food for Peace RFAs. One difference is that we are requesting only a high-level theory of change, and as such, we do not need to see all of the causal pathways with the initial application that would link, say, the activity intervention all the way up to the proposed purpose. Furthermore, the high-level theory of change should exactly mimic the high-level conceptual framework provided in the RFA. This is being done to ensure harmonization among the applications in support of USAID's overall support to the Common Productive Safety Net program. Although I should note that we are USAID open to suggested additional purposes if appropriate, and we do encourage applicants to submit their issues with a high-level conceptual framework to the RFA email now as part of this draft RFA comment period. The limited initial theory of change submission also applies to the initial application's monitoring and evaluation documents being requested. The initial application should include a brief log frame that captures the high-level result indicators and assumptions, but does not need to go all the way down to the individual input level analysis. At the culmination of the first evaluation phase, applicants will proceed, if invited, to the second evaluation phase, which is oral presentation. Again, the details are contained in our RFA. Upon the completion of all oral presentations, a determination will be made among which applicants will be invited to participate with USAID in a limited in scope pre-award co-creation process. This is not a full-scale co-creation process, which is why we still require a robust initial application. For the DFSA applicants, the co-creation workshop will focus on a discrete set of limited activity design components. Some of these limited activity design components actually have arisen in questions today and focus on the components that are contained in the RFA, which are these unknown or unclear PSMP5 design parameters. This includes concepts like the final geographic targeting, the final targeting methodology used to identify PSMP caseloads, the relationship to the humanitarian activity like the joint emergency operation, as well as updated transfer value and modalities. These limited components are still in development for PSMP5, and we need to take these into a limited co-creation process to allow applicants to finalize the full application and costing. The pre-award co-creation meeting will also provide an opportunity to review the collaboration learning and adaptation platforms that was mentioned a little bit earlier, in which applicants will be expected to participate in. In addition, the co-creation workshop may cover other areas that are identified through either the initial application or oral presentation process. It is envisioned that during the co-creation process, the DFSA applicants will be invited to participate in a few days with the resulting APS applicants for the joint emergency operation. This will provide a pre-award opportunity for applicants to coordinate joint equities such as transfer values, targeting criteria, as well as 2021 handover planning. Once the pre-award co-creation workshop is concluded, applicants will be invited to revise and produce a full final application, which will include a full theory of change, a full log frame, and a full budget detail for submission to USAID for final review and approval. While we hope the co-creation process will greatly reduce the issues letter process, there may be a need to revise the final application submission due to remaining technical issues. Upon final technical approval, apparently successful applicants will move to the awarding phase. And that concludes the 5 phases of the traditional pre-award procurement process. We would like to note that there is a post-award co-creation process, which Food for Peace has traditionally called the refine and implement phase. For the Ethiopia Development Food Security activities, this is not a full-scale refine and implement with multiple assessments. The development food security activities are built upon years of successful partnership with the PSMP and implementation of the Government of Ethiopia's Program Implementation Manual. Applicants should understand that during 2021, There are existing development food security activities that will conduct and deliver core productive safety net program services. We will use this refine and implement period to allow new follow-on development food security activity investments to hire, participate in a series of inception and startup workshops, participate in the externally contracted combined endline and baseline, plan for operational handover from existing activity, and pilot new areas of innovation and NGO involvement, which are being clarified now in the current PIM revisions underway with the government of Ethiopia. New pilot areas could include livelihood interventions or single registry pilots or other areas highlighted for innovation focus in the RFA. We envision a limited set of pilot activities in the DFSAs, which will ultimately still be responsible for core PSMP service delivery after handover, though, from existing DFSA activities. Pilots could last several months post the award and would not be at full scale initially at the beginning of the award. The inception year during Refine and Implement will also be a time to initially convene the Collaboration Learning and Adaptation Platforms Steering Committee, develop the Joint Learning Agenda, and preliminary learning questions that will be taken throughout the life of the activity. The culmination of the Refine and Implement period will result in a workshop where partners will convene to share what pilots to take to scale among the activities. As part of handover and coordination with existing development food security investment, applicants should plan for a more limited year one budget request, as they will not be expected to implement at full scale in 2021. The new development food security activities would need to submit a call forward request that plans for in-kind commodity transfers, beginning with the PSMP 2022 transfer cycle. Partners should still plan to budget 5 implementation years from 2021 through 2026 with 5 annual call forward cycles. Depending upon the final awarding timeframe, we envision having anywhere from 3 to upwards of 9 months for partners to be able to plan for handover from existing development food security activities. Existing development food security activities go through September 30th, 2021, subject to the availability of funding, and are expected to continue to conduct full-scale core PSMP activities during this time in 2021. As mentioned earlier, we intend to provide a timeline annex with the final RFA, and we will review these timelines during the co-creation workshop, as USAID may need to adjust due to unforeseen delays and/or input from partners and applicants on the implications of coronavirus. With that, I'd like to conclude the multi-stage process and hand over back to my colleague, Saba.
Thank you, Cliff. Next slide, please. As you have noted in the draft RFA, USAID is asking for a total of 7 key personnel, 5 of whom have been identified in the solicitation with detailed description of their required level of experience and background. We are asking applicants to recommend the other 2 key personnel based on their program design and approach. Next slide, please. And friends, this brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you, everyone, for attending this briefing and for your long-standing commitment to the work of Food for Peace. We greatly value your input and appreciate all the hard work you are doing, especially during these difficult operating times. Thank you again. And now I open the floor for Q&A, which we have received a number of questions from you. Thank you. Some of your questions may have already been responded to during the presentation, but we will try to pick up some other questions that perhaps have not been answered. If you can give us maybe a minute or so for us to sift through the questions, you may experience a moment of silence, but we are here. Thank you. I will take the first few questions. And then as the questions come in, we will go through them all. We have a question regarding the deadline for comment period for the draft RFA. Please note that USAID Food for Peace issued 2 solicitations back to back. One was for the DFSA RFA Ethiopia, which we are currently having this solicitation briefing. The deadline for the comment period for the DFSA RFA for Ethiopia is May 15th. The second solicitation that was issued is an APS, as we call JOP, the Joint Emergency Operation for Food Assistance. And the deadline for comments and questions for the APS is May 22nd. So the RFA is May 15th and the APS is May 22nd. I hope that answers the question. Second one is, will the slide presentations be shared today after the call? Unfortunately, we are unable to share with you the slide presentation. However, this entire session is being recorded and the recording will be available to everyone, and the link will be available on the Food for Peace USAID website. I would say please give us a day or so to make sure that the recording is available for everyone. Number 3, there is a question here regarding the time period of PSNP5 and the design and the PIM. I understand that this question was already addressed in my colleague Indala's presentation. Indala, do you have anything else to add to this question?
Nothing. It's not only on my slide, actually. Cliff mentioned in his slide on the multi-stage process, particularly on the things that are not finalized from the PSNP side, but expected to come out in the coming summer, July, August, which is the new or the revised PIM, program implementation manual. And again, we expect the draft design document will be shared to stakeholders in the very near future. Actually, there was a plan to conduct, I think, the 3rd or 4th round of design workshop, but it was cancelled because of the state of emergency declared in the country, along with a COVID-19 situation. Over.
Thank you, Indala. We have a question here on actually a comment regarding challenges that partners are facing during the pandemic. Please note that we definitely will take every single of these comments and your mitigating plans into consideration. And so I'm not going to address the question here directly. Next question is further clarification on the conceptual framework. And I believe this was also covered in the presentation. Cliff, do you have anything else to add to this question regarding the conceptual framework provided?
I would just reemphasize that we provided the high-level conceptual framework to partners in order to create alignment across all eventual applications and eventual apparently successful applicants. So USAID would have a consolidated framework towards our input to the Productive Safety Net program. It is the intention that the high-level conceptual framework be taken up by applicants as their overall framework for their theory of change. And with the initial application, we are not expecting a full theory of change, but we are expecting that the high-level conceptual framework be taken into the purposes. We're open to that feedback now during the draft RFA comment period, so we encourage applicants who identify issues with the high-level conceptual framework to please submit that feedback to the RFA email. Thanks.
Thank you, Cliff. The next question says, will USAID allow for cash transfer, for instance, for livelihood transfer, youth-based, etc.? Thank you for this question. This was covered in the presentation. Food for Peace anticipates funding of up to $550 million with Title II development resources, of which $300 million may be set aside for Section 202E, and Section 202E may be used for cash transfers and/or vouchers, capacity building, and livelihood. I hope that this answers the question. Next, we have a question on livelihood layering. States FFP has identified livelihood for resilience and livelihood for Oromia as key USAID programs that applicants must layer with both geographically and technically. If this is question number 10, would you be able to respond to this question? Thank you.
Yeah, this has been actually raised earlier, and we hope that we had clarified in that layering slide what the intentions are of the DFSAs if there is existing activity in 2021 through either Livelihoods for Resilience or Livelihoods for Oromia activity. So we refer partners to both that section in the RFA, and again, this presentation when it becomes recorded and available, but USA does intend to have follow-on livelihood activities subject to the availability of funding.
Thank you, Cliff. Next question is there an expectation from USAID that the DFSAs can or should also target landless youth beyond the PSNP participants? Ponjit, would you be able to respond to this question? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think I mentioned this in my slides that yes, landless youth can be targeted, but it should not be, everything should be from the PSNP households. So PSNP households, as I mentioned, they have multiple challenges, including their poverty situation. And the opportunity that they have is very limited. Because resources are really limited, we need to focus all our efforts on PSNP clients, and youth should be from the PSNP household. Thank you.
Thank you, Kunji. Next, we have children and women from poor PSNP households have high rate of acute malnutrition, and they need access to community management of acute malnutrition. Other than referral and linkage to essential services, does USAID expect the DFSA to support CMAM? Melanie, can you please?
Thank you for your question. In Ethiopia, the Ministry of Health has scaled up CMAM down to the Kabele level throughout most of Ethiopia. And generally speaking, NGO's role for CMAM is to help support and build the capacity of CMAM services of the Ministry of Health. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Melanie. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. Next question is, if the high-level theory of change can only be at the purpose and sub-purpose level, 2 levels, would USAID please clarify if the theory of change should not include any intermediate outcome below the sub-purpose level? Cliff, back to you.
Thanks, Saba. Again, we had tried to provide the high-level conceptual framework in order to inform partners' initial application theory of change. In order to reduce the burden of the initial application, we are allowing for applicants to submit an abbreviated or not fully detailed theory of change. If applicants have the time and capability to fully flesh out the theory of change based upon the high-level conceptual framework, then applicants should go ahead and do that. We're not restricting that. In addition, as a reminder, if there are issues with the high-level conceptual framework being presented, we encourage applicants to submit that in terms of the draft RFA feedback to the email. Thank you.
Thank you, Cliff. The next question says, can you please give us clarification and details on the proposed process? Why is it changed from the previous process? There is no much participation of NGOs and others in the design of PSNP 5. Indale, back to you.
Okay, I think I see here two types of questions. The first one is the process of the design and procurement of this DFSA activity, if I correctly understand. If that is the case, I think it's already provided by Cliff in his slide number 20, the multi-stage process. And again, in the draft RFA, we already provided the process of this DFSA design and procurement that applicants can go back and look at the draft RFA. With regard to NGOs' participation in the PSNP design, as far as we know, in the regional consultation that was held a couple of months ago, all NGOs who are part of the PSNP implementation were invited in the regional discussion with respect of the region where they operate. I can give a witness on that. I attended a couple of regional discussions where I met our NGO partners, representatives participating in the regional discussion. So with the inputs collected from that regional discussions, we have seen lots of changes in the PSNP design process. That was very much helpful. Probably there might be a communication gap from government, from the federal to region, and region to our implementing partners in the field as well as in Addis. But as far as we know, we provided list of contact details from implementing partner side to our government counterpart, who is the Ministry of Agriculture, the Food Security Coordination Directorate, and the communication was made through Ministry of Agriculture, not from any donor. So that's all from my side. Over.
Thank you, Indale. The next question we have, can you explain or expand on your strategy for encouraging local NGOs or actors to apply? Applicants are required to show how they will engage in local PSNP processes. Will you consider local NGOs for positively as compared to the past? Randy, could you please respond to this question?
Sure, Saba. We're explicit in the RFA that we are encouraging local NGOs to apply for this opportunity. We'll make no mention of whether or not that approach is going to be considered positively. Over.
Thank you. Next question is, my name is Girma. Hello, Girma, from Oromo community of Minnesota, currently working with health professionals in Ethiopia around the world. The government is not reaching to Oromia region, which the most populated state. Now I have noticed that we with you. How can we do this? Back to you, Randy.
Thanks, Saba. Oromia is the target region for this round of DFSAs. USA will not comment on how partners should focus their efforts in this region, however. Thank you.
I'm not sure if I heard the answer right. Would you please repeat?
Sure. Oromia is a target region of this RFA and this round of DFSAs, but we won't specify how partners should focus their efforts in this region. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. If I could please ask everyone to mute their microphone because it's difficult to hear for everyone else. Please mute your microphones. The next question is for you, Randy, again. Throughout the draft RFA, there are numerous references to graduation, including on page 13, which says, purpose of this activity is to identify pathways towards graduation from poverty. Could USAID Food for Peace please share the PSNP result-based graduation approach and performance standard?
Sure, thanks. Two responses to this question. First, please submit this question formally as part of the question process. Two, we do in a number of sections in the RFA provide references to what we mean by the graduation approach. But I would, page 35 of the RFA, the footnotes of page 35 has a study on the various types of graduation approaches. So that is a reference that this particular offer could go back to. Thank you.
And Randy, I have one more question for you. The design principles of the graduation into sustainable livelihood approach and the making markets work for the poor approach are somewhat distinct. Can USAID provide any insight into the particular elements of these models that feel are most critical for the forthcoming DFSAs?
Again, I would encourage this offer to submit this question formally through the question, through the Food for Peace email address. We could consider making markets work for the poor annex, but we will only do so in response to a formal question from offers. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. The next question is for Cliff. Is there likely to be a shift in capital budgets for public works, community assets, for instance, resulting from greater emphasis on accumulation of household assets to enable graduation?
Thanks for this question. So we did want to emphasize that the goal of the Productive Safety Net program has shifted towards a focus on a poverty reduction strategy. And as such, as we present in our high-level conceptual framework, we are aligning to that shift as well. We'd also like to note that we have signaled to applicants that there is a significant shift in the way that the budget is being organized for the development food security activity applicants. I think as Saba had clarified earlier, USAID intends, subject to the availability of funding, to provide $550 million over 5 years, of which $300 million is being reserved as what we call Section 202E funding, cash-based funding. This almost 54% proportion of the funding is a significant shift in the way that the activity is funded, which will accommodate at WRADA level these types of livelihood deepening interventions while still being able to maintain capital and non-salary administrative budgets. Thanks.
Thank you, Martin. Next question is for Kunjit. RFA 21 Section 2 anticipates the start date of performance period. The anticipated start date of the new awards will be on or about March 1, 2021. The awards will be issued for a performance period of 5 years. In the past, DFSAs have ended in September at the end of the fiscal year. If the award starts on March 1, 2021 for a period of 5 years, would USAID please clarify if the award would end in February 2026 or if applicants should plan for a final year that at a minimum goes through the full PSNP transfer and public works cycle, given the implications on commodity procurements. Kunjit?
Okay, thank you for the question. This is really a tricky question, but looking into the PSNP cycle, PSNP 5 is going to end in July 2025. We don't know exactly what the PSNP, if PSNP 6 is going to be there or not, or what it's going to look like. But in any case, I think it would be good as to plan a
Kunjit, I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
6, but be depending on. Hi, you didn't hear what I said?
Could you please repeat your response? We could not hear you.
Okay. I said that since PSNP 5 is ending in July 2025, and we don't know if PSNP 6 will be there or not, it's going to be it's difficult to tell now, but it would be good to plan for a full transfer season in 2026. Thank you.
Thank you, Kunjit.
And hi, this is Cliff here. I just want to add, as typically we're doing now with the current development food security activities going through September of 2021, the 5th year of planning tends to forward fund the next implementation cycle. So as clarified in the multi-stage process, partners should still plan for 5 call forward annual cycles. Thanks.
Thank you, Cliff. Martin, the next question is for you. Page 31 of the draft RFA states, DFSA applicants should focus their applications to the highland regions of Tigray, Amhara, and Oromia in PSNP 5. However, highland regions is never defined within the document. In the past, USAID Food for Peace has defined highlands as areas with an altitude range of 1,200 to 3,000 meters above sea level, while Natural Resource Management and Regulatory Department of the Ethiopian Ministry of Agriculture has defined highland agroecological zones as areas with an altitude greater than 2,500 meters above sea level. For purposes of this application, can USAID please clarify? To you, Martin.
Thanks. The PSNP design documents clearly define the specifications of the highlands and the lowlands of Ethiopia. So we'll be making clear reference to the PSNP's definition of the highlands in the RFA. That's it. Over.
Thank you, Martin. Next question. This question is for you, Cliff. Does USAID Food for Peace expect details of interventions and outputs in the activity description that go beyond the level of detail, purpose and subpurpose, requested in the theory of change?
Thanks for this question. Yeah, and just to clarify, the theory of change document is a separate document than the narrative document. So while the theory of change can be abbreviated, and we partners do not have to go all the way down to the activity linkage and all of the causal pathway linkages up to the purpose within the theory of change document at the initial application submission, we are still expecting and will use merit criteria to evaluate the technical soundness of how the narrative appropriately proposes activities as they relate to the purposes being proposed. So the narrative still needs to have a logical sequence of activities to purposes.
Thank you, Cliff. And the next question is again for you. Can you please provide more details on the difference between the envisioned refine and implement period, mentioned as being abbreviated, in comparison to traditional refine and implement period? Thank you.
Happy to. And again, while we note that the timelines are still in fluctuation, we do intend to release with the final RFA a timeline that maps out how these various multi-stages will occur in time as mapped to 2021, 2022 processes. In terms of refine and implement, this has been the way that Food for Peace traditionally has used post-award co-creation activities to identify what pilots, through rigorous assessment, make sense to take to scale. Now, for the Productive Safety Net Program and these DFSA investments towards the Productive Safety Net Program, we fully understand that a series of core PSNP activities are highly scripted by the Program Implementation Manual. And as such, we are expecting an abbreviated refine and implement period where the pilots will focus on areas highlighted in the RFA, such as alternative livelihood deepening investments, areas for innovation. But it's a limited set of pilots that would be taken in the refinement approach, with partners being expected to take on full core PSNP activities by the 2022 implementation cycle of the PSNP. Thanks.
Thank you, Cliff. And one more question for you. This one is a little bit long, so be patient. Please clarify. Page 30 of the draft RFA under theory of change states, a theory of change is the conceptual foundation of an activity's design. At the initial application stage, the applicant should develop a high-level theory of change that illustrates the conceptual framework of the design. The high-level TOC should illustrate the hypothesized series of changes at the purpose and sub-purpose level that are expected to occur to a specific target population in a given context. At the initial application stage, Food for Peace does not expect the high-level TOC to go below this sub-purpose level, for example, down to the interventions or output level, but anticipates working with the ASA during the pre-award co-creation workshop to refine and detail their activity design. Is asking for further clarification on this point. Cliff?
Thanks for that. And we'd encourage the applicant to submit that officially to the question period, but overall USA does support the clarification provided. We would like to note, though, that the pre-award co-creation workshop is only going to focus on a discrete set of limited technical areas that we still have to figure out. So for instance, we know that the Program Implementation Manual for PSNP5 is not finalized and out yet, and therefore transfer values and the exact methodology that we will adopt for targeting criteria of PSNP clients may not be known until a later point in time. Overall, though, applicants should assume there will be targeted PSNP clients and there will be transfer values. And as such, we will need to refine those during a pre-award co-creation workshop in order to finalize full application and costing. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Cliff. So for now, we don't have any more questions, and we have about 20 minutes. This is your last call for any further questions. Please type them in the chat box. And we'll give you another minute or so for a few more last questions. And if there isn't any more, then we will probably close this session. So we'll give a few minutes. We received one last question, and Cliff, I would ask you to respond to this, please. Would USAID please clarify if applicants may still invite research and learning partners to their consortium to support a DFSA level learning agenda? If so, can the applicant's lead learning partner also bid to conduct the baseline and final evaluation and integrate its RCT design into the overall learning agenda?
Thanks for that, Saba. It's a two-part question, so I'll take the first one, which is in reference to if we are able to allow learning partners such as research, maybe even universities, into apparently successful applicants' consortia. And yes, that has been done in the past. And as mentioned in the collaboration, learning, and adaptation section on the multi-stage slide, we do encourage partners to appropriately plan for robust participation in the CLA platform, which may or may not involve research partners. On the second part of the question, though, if that applicant's research partner may be going for a separate procurement, which would be the third-party external evaluation for the combination endline baseline, that partner would need to be careful of conflict of interest issues, which would preclude them from that procurement. Over.
Thank you, Cliff. And another one. What are Food for Peace's and USAID Ethiopia's current expectation in terms of how the COVID-19 pandemic might influence procurement processes, availability of funds, and activity design? I think that we really encourage you all to submit the questions or comments that you have with regard to COVID-19 to the email that is designated for this RFA. Our colleagues, we will definitely take all your comments, consideration, challenges, and mitigation plans into great consideration. Thank you. Next question is for Randy. In reference to livelihood deepening, in one place it says 20% for targets and in another it says 1/3. I think that, sorry about that. We will, this probably was a typo, and we will look into this question for the final RFA.
And hi, this is Cliff here. It is a typo. In today's presentation, we hopefully clarified that. It is 1/3. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. We're just collecting the last set of few questions that have come in, reviewing them with the team, and we'll get back to you.
Okay, I think that was it for all the questions. One last one is asking for when Food for Peace will clarify timelines after receiving responses for the draft RFA. We will work our best and we will try to make sure that all your questions and comments are into consideration. We don't particularly have a timeline as of now, but we are working hard, rest assured. And with that, I would like to close this. Thank you again for participating in this briefing. And just a reminder that the recording will be available on the Food for Peace website. The link of that will be available. But please give us a day in order for us to be able to handle that aspect of it. Again, thank you so much, and have a wonderful afternoon and evening. And stay healthy and safe, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you.